Welcome back to another episode of Psycosmos. Today we're going to be discussing, Rich, if you would do us the honors.
Our good friend Matthew is going to draw from this hat, and I shall read it.
Draw! Monster Cuddle!
And he has chosen... politics.
All right.
Lovely.
In general. Just
In general.
politics.
Just politics in general.
There's a lot to bust in there with.
Yeah, there is.
Where do you start?
I think a good place to start would be to first address to the audience, just to keep it in a very simplistic form. We may discuss other countries' politics, but I think mainly we'll probably stick to United States politics and the state that we're in currently at the time of this recording in the year 2019. Mm-hmm. My personal opinion, just right off the bat, politics has become very toxic. I don't think anybody here would disagree with that.
Nope.
Things, well, maybe you do. I don't know. You want to discuss?
No, I don't follow a great deal of politics, but I know where I stand, like on the political scale, which we can get into.
Sure.
But as I say with a lot of things, I hope that there are good people in politics doing the right thing, or at the very least trying to do the right thing.
Which I agree with.
Mm-hmm.
I think overall, the narrative that has been kind of peddled for the last very long time, I will just generously say the last 50 to 60 years, since probably around the time of the end of World War II in America, has grown into what I like to call more of a football match than anything else, where it's one team versus another team, and it's that team sucks.
Agreed.
We can't listen to anything that team has to say. They get violent, they get nasty, and the whole point, I feel, to have, if we're going to have separate parties, which the Founding Fathers didn't really want, if we're going to have separate parties, the whole point should be compromise, and there's very little compromise. Even currently, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, is a salesman by nature. He's a businessman by nature. And even I feel there's no compromise that's kind of being properly instituted in American politics. And I'm not saying it's his fault. I'm saying it's because of the whole of what politics in America has generally become over the years. Not even somebody who, you know, a salesperson by profession is supposed to compromise what the buyer and the seller, want, and kind of blend the needs together for either selling a product or a service. And I feel like even a salesperson in the highest position of office can't even kind of blend together the rhetoric on both sides to a nice compromise position. And I guess we could segue into that.
Yeah, and when you have two extremely opposing sides with no compromise, there's little discussion going on then on how to compromise. It doesn't even get brought up. So I think that itself is a huge problem.
Yeah, and the American people are the ones who end up hurting at the end of the day, because it's
Yeah.
definitely not the political ideologues or the people in power. They get paid ridiculous amounts of money for doing very little work. I've worked in the government sector. They're not the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Active? I guess that's the best word to say. They can clock in, clock out whenever they feel. They have regulated breaks. They get paid massive amounts of money. And of course, you know, this goes into the whole spectrum. But timelines for them, urgency for them is kind of put on a back burner. Why should we care? Why should we worry about kind of getting projects or policies started when we can just kind of, you know, meander through, waste everyone's time, but still make $200,000+ a year, or,
Yeah.
or six-figure income? And I feel as though they've almost run a monopoly on making decisions because they don't have any specific need or urgency. That's why a lot of the issues never get resolved.
On the flip side, and this is only coming from my personal experience, when I was working as a political journalist in Albany, and I would go to a lot of these big events and these big like campaigning rallies. I have to say, some of the best days for me, even as a photojournalist being there, were when that you had people from both sides at these events fighting for the same thing, and for whatever the event may have held, they're fighting for the same thing, but in a different way.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really positive aspect of politics, was that experience.
I think that's the spirit of what you guys were talking about, the compromise and what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Where the idea is, okay, we can come to some agreement on some basic good things that we want to give to the people of this country. And now the question is, how do we do those things?
Mm.
And for a long time, that was generally the atmosphere of politics in this country when it came to compromise. I mean, it's a pretty subjective example, but like when I was a kid, and I don't know how much you guys like remember this or how much you can like agree with this, but when I was a kid, I generally had the overall impression I had about politics in this country was, okay, there's the Democrats and the Republicans, and they both want to do good stuff, but they have different ideas on how they're going to do the good stuff, and they don't really like each other, but they're willing to give and take a little for their personal agendas. I didn't think agenda because I don't even think I knew that word, but
Right.
for their personal goals and everything, in order to give a good to a bigger number of people.
They're willing to settle.
It's like that, and that's how generally I thought of politics when I was a kid, and I feel like that's generally what the atmosphere was. But now, it's a constant game of I have to get even more rooted in the more extreme versions of my ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to do that because otherwise your side is going to uproot me. And on top of that, it's this whole narrative that's constantly being played out of the other side isn't just different from you, and they don't just think differently from you, they're evil.
Yes.
And that's a huge problem because, like, now you're just saying that there's a huge, like, half the population is just evil. It's like, okay, that's a great country to live in. And then two, if they're evil, then you don't have to actually think or talk about or go through or criticize or explain or any of that, any of their points or beliefs or views, any of them, because they're evil.
Yeah.
Why would you do that to an evil person?
Yeah.
It's a great point when you bring up the opposing sides, because it's just a huge distraction, I think, overall.
Definitely.
When it comes to solving like a lot of these big problems that we're trying to get done and fixed. So it's not a good way of going about it.
That football example was so good because that's literally what it is.
That's what it is
That's
now.
the mentality that people have, where it's like, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, you suck, I hate you.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat. Get out. Just get out. It's like that's never going to lead to anything good. And on top of that, it's
Rich,
like,
you mean that there's not going to be like people with jerseys like that are red and blue? One's got a donkey on the back.
yeah, they're gonna get together.
An elephant on one.
And just like after a football game, they're gonna get into a massive fist fight in the parking lot. Yeah, that's generally how it goes.
That's generally how it goes.
But then it's almost like going off that, I guess in a way, if we're the people in the stadiums and they're the teams, then it's like the federal government, the appointed positions, all the bureaucratic positions that aren't elected, they're not chosen by the people, they're basically the NFL. It's like they get to win. They still get to tax us.
Yep.
They still get their salaries.
Yep.
They still get their pensions. They still get their times off. They get all of that stuff. We had no say in it whatsoever.
We just get aggravated.
We just get aggravated, and we get aggravated at each other. That's the worst part. Is that we're not even mad at the people who aren't doing anything. We're mad at each other for picking the people that aren't doing anything.
That is a perfect analogy. It's a great segue too, because when it comes to this red versus blue, Democrat versus Republican, what we're seeing now is, to your point, I completely agree, where when we were kids, it felt at least there was more of a compromisable atmosphere.
Definitely.
Now, it is the Democrats believe that the Republicans are trying to ruin the country with racism and sexism and everything else. The Republicans believe that the Democrats are trying to ruin the country with special snowflake and coddling type of mentalities, socialist mentalities, things of that nature. Well, here's the issue. Why are we pointing the finger and blaming each other and blaming the other side and not looking inward and saying, you know what, we need to actually kind of focus on our own group and how we can better ourselves, not only morally, ethically, and in alignment with rules that are already there, and taking traditions but making them more modernized, but additionally bettering ourselves so that we can actually better serve the American public, the American people, because that's really what it's about.
I think there's two main reasons for that. I think one of them is and I'm not trying to be on a high horse here, because I've got my own set of problems, and
Of course.
I've got plenty of things to self-improve on. But
Sure.
generally speaking, I think it's much harder for a person to accept and to want to better themselves
Yes.
and take responsibility in their small way for the badness in their life than it is to slap it onto an external source.
Projection.
Like an enemy that they
Yeah.
can beat. Because then if I just beat that enemy, then all my problems will go away.
Right.
Chances are it's not.
And with that said, it's a huge loss of responsibility, or like you're not taking responsibility because you're choosing a different course of action to eliminate your problems when the problem might not exist on the other side, but like as you had said, it exists within, and that is something that people need to kind of own.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. I love what you both just said. But absolutely, they need to own that. They need to realize we have our own set of ideas. We have to stay confident that those ideas are what's best for the American public. And we need to come together, both Democrats and Republicans, and kind of, quite honestly, I think what would be very healthy, rather than what's currently going on right now in Congress and the higher political positions, is instead of debating, why don't they come together and they say, these are issues that we have with your side, these are issues that we have with your side, but these are issues that we also feel that we need to work on as well, and we would like tips from the other side. Think about that. Think about, you're
Wishful
laughing.
thinking, my friend.
You're laughing because, and that's the exact same response that everybody else would have, because they would never do that.
Nope.
They don't. You don't have the gall. I hope that there are politicians watching this. I swear, because you don't have the gall and the confidence to put aside the need for votes and the need for money to be able to come to the table with the other side and actually make compromisable decisions. You don't have the gall. And I'm a kid, and I'm telling you it. And I want you, write me a letter. Write me a letter and tell me I'm wrong. You won't, because you're a coward. You're all cowards. I'm making the statement. It's right there.
They probably don't know the address either.
I'm going to put the address on screen. It'll be Joe Biden's house.
But, it's funny you pick it up.
I'm calling him out.
Yeah.
I'm calling him out because it's
No,
ridiculous.
but you're right, and it's like, and the second reason for it is I think there are external forces and people in this world that do make your life worse in a way that is at least mostly removed from your own choices and your responsibility. That happens.
Yeah.
But I feel as though with the atmosphere in the country, and I think the news media has a lot to do with it, it's consistently every problem has that external source.
Yes.
And it's everyone has one, and if you just beat that external source and the problem's gone. It's like that's the thing with everything.
It's unhealthy.
And it's not gonna work. And one of the things that's so funny that I hear all the time on the news for issues like with politics is a good one, gun control is another good one, and then some other good ones would be probably like abortion, racism, and feminism, is we need to have a conversation. And people say that and then don't start the conversation or have the conversation. And it's like,
Yes.
and it goes into just another problem with me, at least for modern politics, is rhetoric. Okay, like, it's pretty easy to say, and I can say this with a good amount of confidence. I don't think Donald Trump is particularly skilled at rhetoric.
I would agree with that.
I think he says a lot of things that he doesn't put necessarily a great deal of thought into, that rub people the wrong way and give a different idea of what he's trying to say and what he's coming from. But one thing, and I'm just saying this as a precursor because it's super obvious about him if you watch the guy. But on the other hand, what I see a lot with the mainstream politicians is they go up there and they spout these empty platitudes.
Yes.
They mean absolutely nothing, and they say it just for the sake of getting votes. So like, you know, we shouldn't have to live in a country where anybody is poor and has a bad day and cries. It's like, well, I don't want that either, but it's not gonna...
Oh yeah, we just live in a perfect utopia, and the world is perfect and smells like,
and it's like
flowers all the time.
It's not that you're wrong. It's not that you're a bad person for saying these things, but it's like you come out there with the idea and presenting yourself in such a way that I am somebody who, through logic and reason and an emotional connection to the people of this country, can come up with solutions that will make their lives better and solve problems.
And it makes me question, is it like a base, like what is the base of your following then?
Right.
Like, what does your following even mean
Exactly.
if you're not saying the things that, for the reason that, like, they're, how can I explain this better? It's like you have a good following, or you're preaching to a following that has nothing to do with your intention, essentially.
Exactly.
Almost.
Because you just go up and you say, like, you do the equivalent of saying murder is bad. Well, yeah, nobody disagrees with that, but it's just like, they say things like that, and then, what is it? What's the phrase? Virtue signaling.
Mm-hmm.
You say something good, and you say, I espouse and I live by and I personify this virtue of being against violence, and a lot of people go crazy and they go nuts and they eat it up and they applaud for you and they think you're a great, wonderful champion of righteousness and justice, and it's like, but you didn't do anything. You didn't suggest a solution to the problem. You didn't even point to a specific problem. You basically just said there's violence in this world and it's bad. It's like, yeah. Nobody disagrees with that.
I want to go off on that point because that's exactly it, Rich. That's exactly the problem, is that they just keep talking about the problems. Mm-hmm. Think about every single platform politician in the last maybe even decade or so that just gets up on the stage and they say, this is a problem, woo! This is a problem, woo! And then this is maybe the solution that'll work, maybe. But we're not really going to touch on that. We're going to keep talking about the problem, woo! And that's it. That's all they do, is they constantly bring up the same exact problems, which, yes, of course these things are issues. Of course these things are hot button topics. Of course these things are problems in society. The best thing to do is to say, okay, this is the problem, but now we're going to discuss the solution more on the heavier end. The reality of it is that they don't know how to solve these problems. They just want to use emotions and identity politics, which has been another big hot button thing that has been.
We jump into that.
We can talk about identity politics for sure, but just to wrap up my point, it's all emotional these days. Everything is emotional. Instead of saying something like the Second Amendment allows you to purchase a gun, it gives you the ability to purchase a gun, it is the Democrats want to take your guns away. Instead of systemic racism is something that exists with evidence or whatever, the argument is, no, everybody who's a Republican is a racist, and they just want to see.
We just know that.
We just know that it exists. We don't need any evidence. We don't need. It's just straw man arguments and it's figure points to get people hopped up on emotional juice, so they'll all drink the Kool-Aid because they're all, especially the older generations, they sit and they watch CNN and Fox News and MSNBC all damn day long, and then they get heated up and they get worked up. They go to these rallies and.
That's the point I was trying to make before, is like, what's your following based on if it's just emotional and not in the root of the problems?
Yeah.
Nothing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And how many of these videos have we seen from both people who are, conservative, liberal, Republican, Democrat, whatever? They go out to these rallies with microphones and they say, hey, how do you feel about this? And I've watched so many of these videos and people just clam up and they're like, oh, well, CNN said this, Fox News said this. They repeat the same things that the TV says. They just repeat the same kind of rhetoric that their side is pushing without having the conversation and saying, I never really thought about it that way.
And that's it. It's a matter of, when it comes to having the conversation, it is so important because it's a matter of going through it and actually thinking through it for yourself, and not just reiterating what mainstream media is saying or other sources. You need to be able to think through these issues yourself, so that way people can understand what you really mean when you say, oh, this is the problem, we need to do this.
Right. I want to make one point and I want to jump into identity politics because it ties this all together. The point that the point that I'm making, the point that I've realized about politics today, is that what they'll do, what these political leaders will do, is they will prey on the identity or the emotions of the people, and they'll clump them together in a group, and they'll say, we need to stand up together, but the individual basis is not there to be able to make those decisions, correct? To be able to appeal to on an individual basis or even on a group basis. And what they'll do is they will play on, and I keep saying this, but this is what it is. They're playing on the emotions. Because think about it like this. You go out to a rally, you take a microphone, which is something that we're probably going to do, and you start interviewing some of these people. They're not arguing for whatever their opinion on the topic is, because it's morally right, evidently right, or factually right. They're arguing about this topic because they have to believe in this topic to continue to keep their own personal identity. Because I'm a Democrat, I'm a feminist, I'm a pro-gun person, I'm this, I'm that. And if this person is telling me that the evidence is stacked against my opinion, that threatens my personal identity, because my identity has been, because you, the individual, have created your identity based off of a political narrative. That is not only extremely unhealthy, but you are giving the control to people who, people in politics are unjust a majority of the time, or even half of the time, or even less than half of the time. At least there is a shred of people who are not good in the sense of how they go about accomplishing some of the tasks. Yeah. It's very underhand. We all have heard of things like the Illuminati and things of that nature. If you know that things are that crazy on that level, why in God's name would you purposefully identify with something like that and have that maintained as your identity without critically thinking things through and not using factual evidence to prove points? That's my point. Now we can jump into identity politics.
2 tips, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Don't watch news, read it.
There you go.
And if you want a good middle ground news story, there's no one site for that. Here's what you do. You find the story, you go to CNN.com, you read it there. Then you go to Fox News. You go to that, you find the story, you read it there. Whatever sort of story fits in the middle of those 2 stories, that's probably what actually happened.
Yep.
Well said.
Because they could
Very well said.
I could take this tablecloth and I could say that it's black, but I could also say it's not white, and both of those statements are true. But the reality is, I don't even know. The only reason that it's black, that we all perceive it as black, is because we're all not colorblind, and we're all seeing it visually in our brain as black. It could be red, and maybe our brains just all read it incorrectly. But the middle truth is there, as you pointed out. Yeah. I think this would be great to wrap up with some identity politics.
Identity politics. Ooh, one of my favorite things.
It has become such an estranged and ridiculous topic that has just been continuously perpetuated I feel on both sides, but I do feel that there are some examples where one side is a little more extreme than the other.
I think the left is more supportive of identity politics.
I agree with that.
At least
yeah.
officially.
Yeah.
I'm not particularly happy. It's been a while now, but I'm not particularly happy that Kamala Harris's response to somebody bringing up identity politics was, no, identity politics is a good thing.
Mm.
I don't see really how.
Right.
But for me, because I don't know the exact definition of identity politics, but I would imagine that it's something along the lines of breaking people down into groups.
Yes.
That is based upon their political ideology or beliefs, and making that the center point of their identity for themselves, and then also from an outside source. So if you look at somebody, the most important part of their identity is where they line up with political values and thoughts. Mm. And for me, that's just really dangerous.
Yes.
Because it's really dangerous for the same reason, and it's slightly off topic, but it's a little bit related with the whole thing with intersectionality. Mm-hmm. I don't like any ideology that says, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to look at your characteristics, and then we're going to choose the biggest ones, let's say, and then we're going to make it so that we can apparently accurately and fairly judge your views and your quality as a human being based off of where you fit into these groups. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So if you're a heterosexual, white, cisgendered male who aligns to the right, that's all we need to know about you to determine your overall quality as a person, what you think about day-to-day things, everything you think about every political position, how extreme you are in any of your political positions, all of that.
That's really dangerous because you're like, okay, camaraderie is a good thing, and it's good to have that, but when you have it within the realms of politics, I feel like that's very dangerous because, as you said, you're putting people in these groups when, as a collective, like, we're all trying to solve these problems, we're all trying to, make the world a better place to live in.
As individuals.
Mm-hmm. And and as you said before, it sets people against each other, as in it's either this way or no way, on both sides of the spectrum.
Yes, absolutely. And it's extremely unhealthy. Mm-hmm. And not only that, But you brought up a great point where I can give the example of African American conservatives. They get completely their opinions just get thrown completely under the bus because the assumption is if you're an African American, you're a Democrat or a liberal or you're left leaning. And if you're right wing, then then your opinion just doesn't matter as much because you don't fit the political narrative of the identity politics. That's really screwed up. I mean, not only is that morally wrong, but that's racist. Let's be very clear. That's racist to say you're African American, you have to be a Democrat because you're African American. Oh, it's even gotten so extreme where you're a Caucasian person, you're a white person. You're probably a racist.
This is the way it's going, though, with the news stories and news media.
Yes.
It's really concerning because, on the one hand, you see stories like that where they say... It's so annoying because some of the news outlets that seem to have a left-leaning bias will say things like, I'm not saying this thing, but wouldn't that be nuts? And it's like, we know what you're doing. Yeah. You're putting it out there. You're trying to put it in people's heads. You don't just get to do that. Yeah. But one of the things they'll do is they'll say things like, oh, well, unfortunately, the way with demographics playing out, it looks like the Republican Party is becoming the party of white people. And it's like, stop that. Don't talk like that. That is racist. That is wrong. You are making everything worse when you talk like that.
And you're misleading the public.
You are not looking at the demographics of a group and accurately relaying and say, I looked into this group. I found out, demographically speaking, they were about 60% white. They were about 10% Hispanic. And the remainder was split between black, Asian, and Jewish.
Sure.
Just trying to use a whole bunch.
Sure.
But that would be looking at the demographics and just saying, this is what I found. But they don't do that.
No.
They say, there's a lot of white guys in the Republican Party.
And that's a problem.
And a lot of the time when when you see the standard image of the Republican Party, you see a lot of white guys. So that must mean that there's a racial component to wanting to be a Republican, and that it's specifically reserved for this one racial group, which is racist, scary. You're pardon the pun, but you're whitewashing stuff.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you could do that same thing for another racial group, and they do, then it should be viewed as if you do it to another racial group and that's racist, then it's racist that whatever
across
racial group you do.
Across the board. Exactly. It works both ways. It absolutely works both ways because you can. And that's something that I feel as though the news media and politics, and again, I'm calling them out. I'm specifically calling them out because it's ridiculous. They take these points and they speak with such passion about things, but they make the assumption, or at least they allude the assumption to the viewers at home that our opinion is the morally right one. Our opinion is the one that's politically correct.
And it goes back to the identity thing. Learn to think for yourself.
Yeah.
You don't need to pick a side to formulate your own opinion, or be on the right or the left to be correct,
Exactly. All it comes down to is, how are we helping people? How are we loving people? How are we doing the best for society? How are we doing what's right for society? And it takes a lot of hard work to be not only to be able to compromise with the other side of the table, but to be able to introspectively have the self-awareness and the confidence and the intellectual aptitude to say, maybe this opinion could be better. Instead, it's, no, I've structured my entire life around this because they told me to. And if anything doesn't align with that, I must immediately attack it because they're attacking me. They're not attacking the opinion. Yep. They're attacking me. And I can't handle that because I'm so fragile and everything hurts inside.
I'm me.
Yeah, and I'm me. But no, you've been spun and you've been lied to a narrative that's just been pushed, maybe because your family did. Your family felt that way their entire lives, or maybe because you watch too much news media. But the point is, kids, be an individual.
Don't be sheep.
Don't be a sheep. Garner your own opinions, and don't listen to what the Magic TV box says. Don't listen to what the politicians say. Do your own evidence, and gain your own evidence, and do your own research on these things. Read books. Become your own type of person. Don't just listen to what anybody has to tell you just because they make it sound like it's true. You have to put in the effort and do the research. You're never going to be a good person deep down if you're not willing to introspectively look at things about yourself and have the self-awareness to realize what's wrong. And I think that's the final point.
Very good.
So why should they listen to you?
Why should they listen to me? That's actually a great point. Why should they listen to me? Because I'm not telling you what to think. I'm telling you, think for yourself. That's the difference. I'm not telling you to believe anything that I have to say that's my opinion. I'm telling you, the person at home, do your own damn research. Figure out these things for yourself. Because life is difficult. And if you go about life just listening to other people
and labeling yourself
and believing anything that they have to say, you're going to be miserable because you're going to run into things that kind of go against that mentality that you've set forth for yourself, especially if it's just been fed to you your whole life. You have to put in the extra effort and become an individual. Don't just be a sheep, like Rich said.
So let this be a message. Why should you watch us? Why should you listen to us? Don't. Unless you want to.
That's right. That's right. Unless you want to. Unless you really want to learn the ways in which you can love others and better yourself. We're not going to feed you a narrative. We're just going to give you the straight truth. And that's what Psycosmos is all about. Joe Biden, sponsor us. I don't know how to end this.
Hi there. If you, like many fine pandas and Jeff, enjoyed this content, please be sure to like, subscribe, ring that bell, and support us on Patreon, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Snapchat. Thank you.